Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Oil falls, stocks rise, and the dollar weakens on growing optimism about efforts to end the war in Iran and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Bloomberg learns the U.S. is drafting a 15-point plan to end the war as the Pentagon sends thousands of troops to the region. Meanwhile, President Trump flags an offer from Iran related to energy flows. Plus, Israel plans to widen military control of a large area of Lebanon and extend the buffer zone, threatening the long-term displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. It's just gone 9 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Joanna Bersecci in Dubai. Well, the theme this morning is one of rising hopes of a breakthrough. I was just noting this morning the polymarket odds of an Iran-U.S. ceasefire by the end of April have risen to 50%. Clearly, there's a lot of focus on some of the comments that have been made by the U.S. and our own reporting suggesting that the U.S. have submitted a 15-point proposal to Iran to help end the war. So we'll see what comes out of these discussions. But markets are reacting to it. The handover from Asia Pacific, pretty positive, up 1.9%. So some of the risk premium has been priced out of those markets. S&P futures also pointing towards a more buoyant open, up 0.8%. Take a look at Brent. We have obviously moved downwards, down 5% on the session today. So shy of $100 here. We're trading at $99 a barrel. There's still a significant amount of geopolitical risk premium still priced into oil, and the fact that this strait, as a reminder, still remains effectively administered and controlled by Iran. USD also slipping a little bit this morning as well. And let me just switch over and show you one terminal chart that I thought was interesting. If you go back to the US and the price action in the US, what has happened throughout the course of this war is that growth has lost a lot of its premium versus some of those value stocks. So this is something that we're going to be exploring with our guest in this show, and just tells you that some of those better performing trades around tech and financials lost their premium throughout the course of this war. Does this create a buying opportunity? We'll discuss in the show. All right, let's move on and also check in on how markets in Asia are faring. Winnie Su is in Hong Kong, and I guess, as I just highlighted, breathing a sigh of relief this morning about a potential diplomatic breakthrough.
Yeah, morning, Joanna. As you mentioned, it is that cautious optimism that we're seeing in Asia today. As you mentioned, it really is on that potential 1-month ceasefire. But overall, you can see that MXAP here up slightly less than 2%. Now, it's a similar move that we saw yesterday, basically an initial pop in the morning and then gradually losing momentum. And what it's telling you is that basically investors are still waiting for that confirmation from the Iranian side, and until then it's going to be just trading from headlines to headlines. Now, for now, we are erasing basically all the losses that we saw from Monday already, but overall it still remains quite choppy, and for most of the benchmarks here we're seeing still trading in the green. Now flip the board and take a look at a sector that's actually trading in focus but trading in the red here is the software sector. We are seeing under a bit of pressure, especially in Japan, and losing a bit more in India earlier today. Now, that is coming after how investors are still putting a lot of focus on these AI disruption fears, especially with a report that Amazon AWS basically is now considering introducing new AI agent to automate some of its functions. Back to you, Jumana.
Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Well, Bloomberg has learned that the U.S. has drafted a 15-point plan to help bring the war with Iran to a close. The proposal has been delivered to Iran via Pakistan, but details remain unclear. Meanwhile, President Trump said the U.S. and Iran are in negotiations right now and signaled that Tehran has offered a present worth a tremendous amount of money as a show of good faith. Trump spoke to reporters at the White House.
I don't like to say this. We've won this. This war has been won. The only one that likes to keep it going is the fake news. They have no Navy left. They have no Air Force left. They have no anti-aircraft equipment left, no radar left, no leaders left. The leaders are all gone. Nobody knows who to talk to. But we're actually talking to the right people, and they want to make a deal so badly. You have no idea how badly they want to make a deal.
The talk of diplomacy comes as Iran continues to maintain its grip on the Strait of Hormuz, while Israel says its military campaign will continue at full intensity, and the Pentagon is sending 2,000 troops to the region. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Sam Daher in Dubai and our Washington Deputy Bureau Chief, Laura Davison, who is in Hong Kong right now. Laura, I'm going to start with you. Just run us through what exactly are the latest developments regarding the U.S.'s diplomatic endeavors.
Yeah, Trump has been very vocal, saying that there's talks going on. He's not really specified who exactly on the Iranian side the U.S. is talking with, but he said that Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance are involved in these talks. We've also reported that there's this 15-point peace plan that the U.S. has sent to Iran, though it's unclear if Iran is behind this plan or even if Israel is behind some of this plan. The details of this remain unclear. One thing is certain: Trump has said publicly that and this deal would include a prohibition on Iran ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. But beyond that, it's unclear if this is really sort of Trump projecting out into the world what he would like to see, or if these are more substantive talks that have buy-in, at least initially, from the Iranian side as well as the Israeli side. And as you noted, there are sort of a buildup of troops. The U.S. continues to send Marines and other soldiers to the region, and Israel today has continued to intensify its attacks. So we're seeing a lot of mixed messages on the diplomatic front.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Iranian side of things. Sam, it's interesting, in the introduction to this, we were just playing some comments that came through from President Trump, and he said there's no leadership left in Iran. So if he's saying that, then it becomes a question of who exactly are the U.S. engaging with these diplomatic channels, and do we understand better what conditions the Iranians are setting in order to proceed with talks?
Thank you, Jemana. But he also said we're talking to the right people in the same breath. So obviously, I mean, just to pick up on what my colleague Laura said, there's still a lot of uncertainty over, who on the Iranian side would be participating, how these negotiations would be structured, ultimately the deal itself. But I mean, from various sources, we hear, the focus is on two men on the Iranian side: the powerful Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and the Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, who's obviously a much more well-known entity in the West. He'd been, leading the negotiations before the war. And Ghalibaf, interestingly, posted on X, when Trump came out and said that the Iranians were talking to the Americans, he denied it. But he also said that Iranian people, I mean, I'm reading what he said, Iranian people demand complete and remorseful punishment of the aggressors. That was in his post on X. And my understanding and our understanding from various sources is that Iran is looking for legally binding guarantees that the U.S. and Israel won't attack it in the future. They're looking for billions of dollars in reparations. They're looking for sanctions relief. They're also floating the idea of U.S. withdrawal from the region, military withdrawal from the region. Obviously, these are all big asks. But ultimately, also to mention the Strait of Hormuz, they want to formalize control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is a big ask, obviously. But ultimately, for the Iranians, I mean, just for them to come out and say, we've survived this, we've survived this war. And it was, from their perspective, President Trump was the one that blinked first.
Yeah. Sam, thanks for the context there on the Iranian, I would say, wish list. Laura, you mentioned this, but I think it's also significant in the context of these two strands running parallel. On one side, the U.S. are talking about diplomatic endeavors. At the same time, there are reports that extra reinforcements are being sent to the region. So what do we know about the new troops that are being deployed?
Yeah, so the latest round of troops to go are from the 82nd Airborne Division. These are essentially special forces, troops that would be sort of the front line of defense to go in if there were some sort of ground invasion. The administration has been talking about that. No plans have been finalized for any sort of ground operation there. This is on top of about 5,000 Marines who are also on their way to the region as well. So there's been a pretty significant buildup of military might just in the past couple days. This has really caused some both U.S. allies as well as Iranian officials to sort of speculate out loud if all of this talk of diplomacy is really just a head fake or a cover for a bigger invasion that's about to come.
Yep. And Sam, I just want to bring it back also to this 5-day deadline that Trump set at the beginning of this week. He instructed the Department of Defense not to hit any Iranian infrastructure. Now, you've written a piece, you and our colleagues have written a piece about the Gulf states' stance towards the war, and that an attack on their critical civilian infrastructure would be a red line.
Absolutely. I mean, my understanding from multiple sources here in the region that when President Trump said he was going to attack Iran's power plants within 48 hours, and then the Iranians came out with a list of targets in the Gulf. My understanding is that from a source that's close to the Saudi leadership, that Riyadh informed President Trump that the moment Iranians hit Iran identified 2 power plants and desalination facilities in the kingdom, that Riyadh would respond, would actually strike Iran, would effectively enter the war. So the stakes were quite high, and obviously we had been getting a lot of strong signals from the United Arab Emirates, where I'm sitting, that their patience is really wearing out at this point. I mean, we had a post by the foreign minister, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, saying we won't be blackmailed by terrorists, and also our understanding, our reporting is that last week at the meeting of foreign ministers in Riyadh that was attended by every Gulf country except Oman, which appears to want to maintain its position as mediator with Iran, and as well as regional powers, where they are, representatives of regional powers, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, and others, that actually the military option was put on the table, like to respond to Iran, because I mean the whole meeting was about how do we come together to counter Iran, and it's not just these threats, but also, I mean, in recent days, both the UAE and Kuwait have announced that they've uncovered so-called terror cells linked to both Iran and Hezbollah on their territory. So the threat is big, and we're talking also about more than 5,000 missiles and drones that have hit not only energy facilities and airports, but have also targeted residential areas, diplomatic areas, tourist sites. So really, I mean, the patience is, as the Saudi foreign minister said last week, our patience is not unlimited. Iran has to understand that.
Yeah. Bloomberg's Sam Dakhir in Dubai and our Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison in Hong Kong. Thank you so much. Now, oil declined and equities rallied as optimism strengthened around Washington's diplomatic push to resolve the nearly month-long Middle East conflict. Joining us now from Hong Kong is Angelina, a CIO of Asia and Middle East at St. James's Palace. I noted right at the top of the show that there seems to be some cautious optimism prevailing in markets now. But at the same time, still very subject to all of the headlines that are coming through. A lot to wade through. Is it just better to not do anything until we get more clarity over the weekend?
Good morning to you, Jumana, and thank you very much for having me on the show. Now, from a market's perspective, it really hates uncertainty, and what we really have had for the last month is uncertainty. Today's hopeful optimism is really a sort of a hope that we might have some timeline to a resolution. Now, let's just take a step back in terms of how this current conflict has caused from a market's perspective. We've had supply-side chokes on oil, gas, fertilizers. Economically, that has impacted on short to medium-term inflation. We've had the 2-year break-even for tips currently still standing at 3.2%, with Goldman Sachs warning that US inflation could in fact peak at 4.9%. This will certainly have some impact to Fed's rate path. In fact, that the market has already changed its expectation to potentially a 25 basis point hike this year, which actually a week earlier the market was expecting still some sort of rate cut. So with all of this and all of the changing situations, we're seeing quite a lot of volatility really within the market. But what does that really mean to the investors? At the moment, moment, really, the impact is not completely known. And this is the point in time where really, when we talk to our investors, we're sort of saying, stay humble, keep to some of the key principles and some of the key messages that we do have to our clients. Don't react, but be prepared and focus on the fundamentals. So exactly to your point, to your question earlier, markets don't like uncertainty. We've seen certain volatilities within different asset classes. Oil obviously going up significantly, reaching almost 120 US dollars per barrel earlier in the month, but now retracting below the $100 mark. But US dollar actually strengthening after quite a prolonged period of depreciation last year. Gold, a really interesting one, obviously had a really significant run last year, but then significantly losing its value. So really, to your question, to our investors, we're saying, don't react, be prepared, focus on the long term.
Yeah, one of the charts that I showed at the top of the show displays how growth has lost its relative premium to value stocks throughout the course of this war. Is that the correct reaction, do you think, from markets to sort of reprice the growth outlook for some of these very favored stocks at the beginning of the year?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question and a great question. What we have, what we're terming a little bit of a rotation confusion at the moment. Now, taking this current conflict aside, even sort of throughout most of last year, we're sort of been warning around some of the really high valuations that we've been seeing on the US mega cap tech companies in the US. Now, as part of the natural cycle in general, after 2 very strong years in what in the US was called a midterm year, we generally expect certain amount of corrections. So we have already seen, starting to see some of that corrections and rotation towards the end of last year and beginning of this year before the conflict started. What we have since observed, actually, quite interestingly, is some reversal in that rotation outside. So we're actually seeing some of the valuation coming back to the bigger companies from the winners, such as the small caps, and Korea actually one of the strong winners at the beginning of the year. With today, this morning, obviously very, very short period of time, we're seeing again some small reversal of that trend. So really what we're seeing is potentially this growth to value rotation is a bit of a rotation cycle that we're expecting as a natural course of the market, of the valuations, of just the market assessing to say, where do I find the most value, versus the short-term volatility, uncertainty caused by the geopolitical conflict that I just talked through earlier.
Angelina, really good to have you on. Thank you so much. Angelina Lai, CIO of Asia Middle East at St. James's Palace. Now, still ahead, we'll talk to David Wood, Senior Lebanon Analyst at International Crisis Group, as Israel says it will take control of southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. But up next, oil prices fall as talk of a diplomatic push by the U.S. to try to end the war gathers pace. We'll get the latest analysis next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jomana Brisecci in Dubai. Well, oil prices falling as a diplomatic push by the U.S. to try to end the war with Iran gathers pace. That's despite news of more troops being sent to the region and the Strait of Hormuz remaining largely shut. For more, I'm joined by our energy reporter, Anthony DePaula. Well, clearly we're seeing a reaction this morning, Brent down almost 5%. On this diplomatic push by the U.S. But it is interesting to note that Iran have identified how much leverage they have over the choke point that is the Strait of Hormuz. You and the team have written up reporting suggesting that they've actually started to charge a toll for vessels looking to pass through. So talk us through about, on one hand, the diplomatic efforts and the impact that's having, but at the same time, the fact that this strait is effectively shut or still being controlled by Iran.
Yeah, I think, Jomana, the way you put it the second time there, that it's effectively controlled is probably what is turning out to be the accurate description, in that It's closed to most traffic, but Iran, as this has gone on, has allowed some vessels to trickle through there, some vessels that are from nations that they say are friendly to them. So they've let some vessels go, Iranian vessels taking oil to China. They've discussed with India and let a few Indian vessels go through. And now it seems that they are charging for vessels to go through, as we reported. So they are making some hefty charges to give permission to a vessel to go through. And it's vessels that they say are from friendly nations, so not the belligerent nations involved in the war against them. This is also kind of the worst nightmare for some of the Gulf countries here. So on the political side, we've been seeing some reporting that the Gulf countries want to see a resolution to the current conflict that makes a change in Iran, that doesn't leave a strong Iranian regime there able to exercise sway over the region. And from the oil and energy viewpoint, the Gulf countries don't want an Iran remaining that realizes it still has this leverage over the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz has had free access to all international shipping, and that's been so important enabling this region to really feed the global energy machine and allowing all that oil to get out.
Yeah.
If there's one country that's got a monopoly over control of that, it's really going to continue to choke off and block those flows, potentially even into the future, Jumana.
Yeah. And Anthony, of note yesterday as well, I mean, there was so much news, but one of the developments that caught my attention, Qatar Energy also declaring force majeure on some of their longer-term contracts, not just the short-term contract, but some of the longer-term contracts as well. You and the team have written and reported on some of the long-term damage that the energy sites in the region are going to be faced to contend with, even if the war ended in a couple of days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of factors at play here in terms of the industry. So even if we've got some facilities that haven't faced damage, refineries and oil fields have had to either shut down or scale back operations because oil has not been able to flow, as we said, out of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. It's been blocked in there. So storage tanks have simply been filling up. There's no place left to put the oil that is being produced. So producers have had to stop that output, stop pumping the oil. That's then led to refineries to stop. It takes time to resume these facilities. They depend on pressure. They depend on constant flow. So you need to slow them down cautiously so as not to damage and lose pressure that builds up in the oil fields. And then at the same time, you need to start them up slowly as well. There's also the challenge that as this, when we have a resolution, as this slower startup takes place, all the vessels, the tankers, have gone to other areas to pick up cargoes where they can find them. So you need to bring these vessels back to the Persian Gulf area to start picking up crude and start getting it out to the markets. So that also will take time. So we will have a period of a startup that will take time. And that's not even to speak of facilities where we've seen real damage, like the Qatar LNG, where you mentioned. We've had shutdowns at refineries in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, some more damage than others. Bahrain has taken some damage. So it's going to take time also to repair the damage to these facilities. Of course, spare parts are not getting into the Gulf either. So we're going to have to wait till there's a resolution of the conflict till we can even start with those repairs, Jumana.
Anthony, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following today. Iran has stopped natural gas exports to Turkey following last week's Israeli strike on the giant South Pars gas field. But sources also say Ankara is still importing gas from its main suppliers, Russia and Azerbaijan, and can continue using gas held in storage. The energy minister told state broadcaster TRT that Turkey is not facing any gas supply issues and storage facilities are 71% full. Chevron is warning that California is heading towards an energy crisis because of the Iran war, and state officials should declare an emergency. The company says it may quit refining oil in the state within a decade unless officials roll back taxes and regulations. California is highly exposed to the disruption as it imports about 20% of its refined fuels. And And a look at equity markets because we have started to price in cautious optimism around the possibility of peace talks or a truce or a 30-day ceasefire between Iran and U.S. So some optimism prevailing. S&P futures up 0.7%. And then European markets, take a look there, up almost 1.1%. Coming up, we'll talk to David Wood, senior Lebanon analyst at International Crisis Group, as Israel says it will take control of southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Oil falls, stocks rise, and the dollar weakens on growing optimism about efforts to end the war in Iran and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Bloomberg learns the U.S. is drafting a 15-point plan to end the war as the Pentagon sends thousands of troops to the region. Meanwhile, President Trump flags an offer from Iran related to energy flows. Plus, Iran plans to widen military control of a large area of Lebanon and extend the buffer zone, threatening the long-term displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. It's just gone 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Jumana Bersechi in Dubai. Well, markets are trading with a little bit of optimism. There's green on the screen, perhaps around all of the headlines that have come through the reporting suggesting that the U.S. is pushing the diplomatic channels with Iran. According to our own reporting, they've submitted a 15-point plan to Iran. Whether or not this is going to yield anything substantial, of course, is a big question mark. But what we do understand is there has been some attempt at de-escalation. At the same time, just a reminder, the war is still going on. It is day 25 of this war, day 26, actually, I believe. And there are no signs really of things letting up in terms of military operations. So let's just remind everybody that the war continues. Now, in the meantime, we have a handover from Asia Pacific that is pretty positive, 1.8% from MSCI. So Asian indices trading with more buoyancy this morning. S&P futures up 0.7%. Take a look at oil. Once those headlines started coming through from the U.S. suggesting that they are working on a 15-point plan for Iran, we did plummet around 8-9%, but still trading very close to $100, as you can see this morning. So just shy of that, but still 4% lower on the day. And then the USD also slipping slightly in trading too, as some of that extra premium that went into the safe haven gets unwound. And switching over, one of the charts that I've been flagging this morning, which I thought was interesting, if you think of the underlying rotation that has taken place in U.S. equities, U.S. growth has been losing some of its valuation premium relative to value, i.e. some of those very favored parts of the market at the beginning of the year, like financials and like tech stocks, have seen a lot of their valuations being taken out throughout the course of this war, and is actually sitting at multi-year lows relative to some of those value stocks. So something to bear in mind if we do get a resolution of this war in the next few days. All right, let's also check in on how markets in Asia are faring. Winnie Su is in our Hong Kong studio. Winnie.
Yeah, morning, Jumana. As you just mentioned, there is that cautious optimism feeding into the Asia session with these positive headlines coming through. And we're looking at MXAP here up slightly less than 2%, but still it is taking our two-day gains to the biggest in about 2 weeks. Now, we are hearing still a lot of uncertainty in terms of where the Iranian side stands, and hence it will be difficult for traders to trade in this environment. That's why we're not seeing too much of a follow through when it comes to buying later in the session today. Now, in terms of where we're trading of all these major benchmarks, mostly in the green, but worth highlighting that there is some weakness in terms of the Hang Seng Index up just less than 1%. Now, that underperformance also comes as this week being Asia's busiest earnings week this sector, this quarter, but we are seeing some weak market reaction when it comes to earnings result from Xiaomi as well as from PopMart that we're seeing. Now, flip the board and take a look at the software sector, a bit unrelated to war, but still we are seeing a bit of a fear coming back in when it comes to AI disruption. You are looking at the board, mainly here software names in Japan in the red. That's also coming after a report that Amazon, specifically AWS, is now considering a new AI agent to automate some of its functions as part of that restructuring plan. Back to you, Jumana.
Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Now, Israel's defense minister says the military will take control of southern Lebanon up to the Litani River to prevent Hezbollah from transporting weapons and fighters. Lebanon has withdrawn accreditation from the Iranian ambassador, demanding his departure from the country by Sunday. Bloomberg's Dan Williams joins us now. Dan, I want to pick you up on those comments that came through from Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz yesterday, suggesting that the posture has shifted in Israel towards deterrence and potentially towards a more long-term, quote-unquote, occupation in the southern part of Lebanon. What do we understand is the objective here?
I think you're certainly right, Jemana. This has been Israel's general multi-front posture since that Hamas attack of October 7th, 2023, which set off this ongoing conflict now in its third year. In southern Lebanon, Israel has a long-running score to settle with Hezbollah. That has been Iran's cat's paw in the region, in neighboring countries. And indeed, even as this war rages in Iran, this Israeli-US war against the Iranian regime, this second front between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon is quickly gathering pace, intensity, could even eclipse that Iran war in terms of intensity and could become more protracted, certainly for Israelis and Lebanese. Israel's attitude is, even at the cost of displacing some 1 million Lebanese civilians so far from southern Lebanon, that this is the price that has to be paid by the Lebanese state so long as it fails to rein in Hezbollah as required by multiple agreements, including UN ceasefire agreements going back years. There's some indication the Lebanese state, as you noted, is feeling emboldened to crack down domestically on Hezbollah, on its Iranian sponsor. For the Israelis, this is too little, too late, and they're willing to go in quite deep. I mean, the Litani River, which the Israelis say now they will hold, and everything south of it, that accounts for some 10% of Lebanese territory. The Israelis are basically saying this is what needs to be done to clear out Hezbollah, and the Lebanese civilians will come back once that job is done.
Dan Williams, thank you so much. Let's get more analysis now with David Wood, senior Lebanon analyst at International Crisis Group. David, I want to pick you up on something that Dan Williams, my colleague, just mentioned, which is the fact that Israel attests that the Lebanese government were not able to rein in Hezbollah. And I myself, I had many interviews with Lebanese government officials. They said that they were implementing the Lebanese army's plan to disarm Hezbollah. They say that they had succeeded south of the Litani River. But of course, we have found out in the last couple of weeks that that has not been the case, because Hezbollah had indeed been capable of rearming. Why did the Lebanese government not succeed at reining in Hezbollah?
So, Jemana, I think the Lebanese government, ever since the ceasefire agreement with Israel in November 2024, has been trying to walk a delicate and dangerous tightrope, which is, on the one hand, trying to implement its obligations under the ceasefire, but on the other, not wanting to provoke civil strife by aggressively confronting Hezbollah. So what this has meant is that as time went by, the government was trying to attract Hezbollah's cooperation with the disarmament process, which was required under the November 2024 ceasefire deal. But as you say, in reality, Hezbollah was complying only up to a point, and in fact was using this period to rearm itself in contravention of the agreement's terms. At the same time, it's worth noting that Israel itself didn't respect the terms of the ceasefire deal and conducted near daily attacks on Lebanon during the ceasefire period and continued to occupy several points in southern Lebanon. So while it's understandable that there is concern that the Lebanese government cannot, in fact, rein in Hezbollah, and that is accurate, there are cogent reasons for this. And I can give you the main question people will ask is, why doesn't the Lebanese government just send the army to confront Hezbollah and force it to stand down? And there are two reasons that it can't do that. Number one is that Hezbollah is showing on the battlefield right now that it can put up a fight against the might of the Israeli Defense Forces. Therefore, Lebanon's under-equipped army would face an incredibly perilous situation trying to confront Hezbollah right now. And the other is a long-running fear, which is well-founded, that if the Lebanese army goes to confront Hezbollah, the army itself could split because many of the Lebanese Shia officers and soldiers in the army might desert or even defect to fight alongside Hezbollah.
Interesting. David, how do you read the Lebanese government's decision yesterday to expel the Iranian ambassador?
So this is exactly the kind of decision that is significant, but would have been momentous if it had been made before the current escalation. So we have known that for decades now, Iran has had an outsized influence over Lebanon's domestic affairs, first and foremost through its direct support for Hezbollah, its proxy ally. However, I mean, as your correspondent was pointing out before, I think there's a perception in Israel that this kind of decision comes as too little too late. So on the one hand, you have Israeli leaders coming out yesterday and welcoming the Lebanese government's decision. And then in the same evening, you have Israel's defense minister saying openly that Israel plans to occupy Lebanese territory up to the Litani River, which is, as your correspondent was saying, 10% of Lebanese territory. So I think at this point, Beirut can continue to try to make these efforts to convince Israel, the United States, and the Lebanese people that it's trying to take action on Hezbollah, but it will need to ultimately demonstrate that it can do two key things. One is to force Hezbollah to stand down, and two is to force Hezbollah to surrender its weapons. And as matters stand, it cannot satisfy either of those tasks.
David, there was an incident a couple of days ago where the government had suggested or drafted a plan for sheltering a huge number of displaced families in a central part of Beirut, and it was met with a lot of pushback from local municipalities. What is your level of concern about the possibility of real possibility now of civil sectarian strife within the country, given the over 1 million people that have been displaced from the southern parts of Lebanon? It appears as though we've lost connection. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. I wanted to ask about that displacement question with over 1 million Lebanese residents being forcibly moved into other parts of the country. And this is a very small country. All right, David Wood, senior Lebanon analyst at International Crisis Group, who was with us just now. And coming up, the EU steps up its presence in West Africa, deepening ties with Nigeria and boosting security support for Ghana. We'll bring you details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Bersetchi in Dubai. EU High Representative Kaya Kallas is in West Africa seeking to deepen ties with Nigeria and Ghana. The EU unveiled new investment and cooperation deals with Nigeria while also stepping up security support for Ghana. For more, our Chief Africa correspondent Jennifer Sabazaja joins us from Johannesburg. Jen, walk us through what's been announced.
Yeah, Jumana, this was really an effort by the EU to deepen political, economic and security ties with the region, as you were just mentioning there. So what we saw, if we just start with Ghana, we did see the EU actually effectively signing the first African country to a formal defense and intelligence sharing agreement. This is significant because this will entail counterterrorism, surveillance support, and also crisis response. This is, of course, coming as we do see jihadist violence spreading across the Sahel. You mentioned in the intro, of course, some of the other investment pledges that we got from the EU and from Kallas's trip to Nigeria in particular. She announced a 290 million euro package for projects that include digital infrastructure, health manufacturing, agriculture, and migration management. So really, all in all, what we did see from this trip and what we heard from Callas throughout the past few days is that it seems like this is a bit of a shift for the EU into a bit more of a strategic focus into security and also investment-driven partnerships with some of the West African states and those along the Gulf of Guinea.
What is driving this renewed push by the EU in West Africa, Jen?
I think really, Jumana, we have to look at this in a few different parts. I mentioned the fact that this is really a three for, if we take a look at the investments and the announcements that were made over the past few days, economic, political, and security. Over the past few years, we have continued to see security be threatened in what have been traditionally stable countries along the Gulf of Guinea. So part of this, if you look at it from the EU perspective, they see this as a way to not only protect some of the stability and the stabilization efforts of some of these African countries, but we also heard how this could potentially impact migration into Europe more broadly. If we take a look at it from the economic perspective, some of the Nigeria announcements around investment partnerships could be opportunities for European companies to invest in some of the Nigerian companies. We've seen quite a lot of activity as far as the startup space and entrepreneurs coming out of Nigeria. And really, and I think perhaps most strategically, we should take a look at what we've seen over the past few years. We've seen a bit of dominance from China and Russia in the region, especially if you look at what has been a bit of a retreat from France in some cases in some of these countries. And so perhaps this is a doubling down of the EU and seeing a way to at least position themselves strategically with some of these countries that are very important for not only their own national and the bloc zone interests, but potentially the interests of some of these states on the continent.
Jennifer Zabazaja, our chief Africa correspondent in Johannesburg, thank you so much. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following. Angola has sold $2.5 billion in Eurobonds, capitalizing on stronger investor demand as oil prices climb. The proceeds will help fund a buyback of existing debt as the oil exporter taps market interest amid supply disruptions linked to the Iran war. South African banks are lowering the bar for private banking, targeting clients earning around $44,000 a year. The move opens up a service traditionally reserved for the ultra-wealthy to a much broader group of high earners. Banks are betting on long-term relationships and cross-selling as competition intensifies and lenders look to tap a larger pool of potential clients. And coming up, air travel across the Gulf remains heavily disrupted as the war drags into its fourth week. We'll bring you the latest next. This is Bloomberg.
We'll see, but I would guess that when this is over, that places like Dubai come back 100%. I don't know. We'll watch and see, but I would bet on Dubai for the long term.
United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby there saying Dubai will come back 100%. That's as air travel across the Gulf remains heavily disrupted as the war drags into its fourth week. Carriers including Lufthansa and Cathay Pacific have cancelled services to key destinations like Dubai, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv. For more, we're now joined by Bloomberg's Al-Rashdan. Aline, what is the latest on flight disruptions and how widespread are these suspensions right now?
The suspensions have not gotten better since the start of the war, really. So some of the local airlines have recovered a bit. Emirates, Fly Dubai, Air Arabia, Tehran, all in the UAE. They've been able to kind of recover some of the operations. Qatar Airways, Kuwait Airways, Gulf Air, and Bahrain are still largely suspended. They are not flying nearly as much as they were before, and mostly working out of airports in Saudi Arabia because the airspaces in those countries are still largely closed. Add to that that foreign carriers are not flying into the UAE or into Qatar Bahrain and Kuwait. So not only are the local airlines affected, but then anyone who wants to travel on these foreign carriers, they're unable to do so as well. Some of them have extended the suspensions till October. They've bypassed the entire summer season. So while there's been some recovery, the airlines are still largely grounded. There's not been much improvement, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. This morning or overnight, Kuwait airport was struck by a drone that hit a fuel tank. So, and that airport's been struck several times. There were drone incidents at the Dubai airport. So it doesn't really seem like things will be moving there anytime soon.
And of course, one other factor to consider is the fact that energy prices have been climbing. Jet fuel prices are surging. We heard from United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby on this. Let's just listen to what he said.
There will be less demand. There'll be fewer people traveling as prices go up. That's part of our cut capacity 5%. Like, you know, when airfares have to go up because of oil prices, there are going to be some people that choose not to fly, and it'd be naive not to realize that. If oil prices stayed where they are today, that's $11 billion of expense for us, and that would require prices to be up 20% to break even.
Okay, so higher fuel costs. Leon, how much is that compounding the pressure on airlines right now?
I mean, you add to the surge in fuel prices, and then also that a lot of these airlines for the long-haul routes, they're having to bypass a huge chunk of the Middle East. Of course, add to that Russia, some countries have to avoid Pakistan. So on top of the high oil prices, they also have to spend so much more fuel just to avoid all these areas. Philippine Airlines this morning said that their fares will be 30% higher. A lot of airlines, Vietjet, and others are already adding fuel surcharges, and they are cutting some international routes because they are unable to, find justification to maintain them with the high fuel prices. The big worry for airlines is that the higher the fuel prices, they will have to pass that cost down to their customers, and then people, are they really willing to pay 30% more for tickets, especially with so much uncertainty in the world and people being afraid of really what's going to happen in all markets in general?
Bloomberg's Al-Rashdan, thank you so much. Well, ARM Holdings will begin selling its own chips for the first time, adding a business that it expects to generate about $15 billion annually within 5 years. The CEO, Rene Haas, spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie about the new product and its aggressive sales goals.
Today in 2026 is about $60 billion, $70 billion, depending on your maths. I talked about agentic AI driving a 4x CPU workload even today. So $60 billion going to $100 billion by the end of the decade in terms of market opportunity is not really that much of a stretch.
And let's turn to equity markets now, because there is a sense of optimism around the diplomatic efforts that the U.S. has been making. Yet to hear from the Iranian side, I should say, about whether these direct negotiations or even indirect negotiations are actually going to take place. There's been chatter about a potential meeting later this week in Pakistan, but again, not confirmed. That being said, the markets are reacting quite positively to the string of headlines that came through over the last 24 hours. So S&P futures up 0.6%, an even better start looking like it's going to be for European markets, with futures there up more than 1%. And of course, oil trading at around Brent, trading at around $100 here, as it reacts as well to some of the optimism that's baked in. So $100 is where we're at for Brent. But that is it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Bersace in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.